The name Brian Carn had always been associated with a figure of deep spiritual influence. People didn't just listen to him, they believed him. There was something about his voice, a warmth and confidence that drew people in. Every Sunday, every sermon, and every gathering would see people traveling long distances just to hear his stories, hoping to feel that same spark in their own lives. For years, everything seemed perfect. No one ever imagined that the very person they admired so deeply could one day fall from grace. A small rumor began to spread. At first, only a few whispered about it behind closed doors. Gradually, the whispers grew louder, reaching more and more people within the church community. Some claimed that certain events Brian had shared didn't match reality. Others said that some of the miraculous stories he told seemed unlikely or even impossible. These small doubts slowly began to form a much larger, more troubling picture. Despite all this, Brian would step on stage every Sunday with the same confident smile, delivering his sermons as if nothing was wrong. But the voices in people's hearts were growing louder. They could no longer remain silent. There was a truth waiting to resurface, one that had been buried deep, but was now breaking through the surface like water rising after years of being hidden. And then, the moment finally came. Proof began to emerge that threatened to shake the very foundation Brian had built over the years, a foundation of trust, fame, and influence that he had carefully crafted. This is where the real journey begins. And today we bring forward the truth that has been hidden from everyone for far too long. Brian Carn didn't become a well-known church leader overnight. His journey to prominence was gradual but steady, built over years of hard work, dedication, and a remarkable ability to connect with people. He was known for his charisma, the way he could make anyone in the room feel seen, heard, and understood. People admired not just his words, but the energy and sincerity with which he delivered them. Over time, Brian became more than a preacher. He became a figure of inspiration. Many saw him as someone who could turn struggles into hope, who could make miracles feel possible, and who could speak directly to the hearts of his followers. His sermons often included personal stories and testimonies. These were tales of overcoming hardship, of divine intervention, of life-changing moments that inspired faith in those who listened. Congregants came back week after week, eager to hear what he would say next. For them, his words were not just sermons. They were lessons, comfort, and sometimes even life guidance. His reputation grew beyond his own community. Videos of his sermons circulated online, and social media followers increased by the thousands. People across the country, and even internationally, started to take notice of Brian Carn. What made Brian so powerful was the trust people placed in him. Many felt that he shared his life honestly, that every story he told was authentic. He became the type of leader people relied on during their most vulnerable moments. Sick people prayed for his blessings, families sought his advice, and young leaders looked up to him as a model of spiritual strength. Yet the higher someone rises, the more scrutiny and pressure naturally follow. Even a few small inconsistencies in a well-crafted public image could grow into serious doubts if enough people noticed. It all started quietly, almost imperceptibly. At first, only a handful of congregants noticed small inconsistencies in Brian's stories. Maybe it was a date that didn't match, a detail that seemed exaggerated, or a miracle he described that sounded almost too perfect to be true. Some dismissed it at first, thinking it was a simple mistake or perhaps a lapse in memory. But as these minor doubts multiplied, they began to stir a quiet unease in the hearts of those who had once trusted him completely. People began to talk in hushed tones after the services, wondering if what they had been hearing for years was really the truth. As weeks passed, the whispers grew louder. Social media became a subtle platform for concern, with some followers asking pointed questions, not knowing that these small observations would snowball into something far bigger. Church members shared stories with friends and family, sometimes questioning themselves. Had they misremembered? Or had Brian really said things that didn't add up? The uncertainty spread like a ripple through the congregation, creating tension that had never existed before. People who had been inspired and uplifted by his words were now feeling confusion, and in some cases, betrayal. The rumors weren't wild or malicious at first. They were simply questions, small doubts that grew naturally from attentive listeners noticing patterns. Some of the congregants who had been quiet for years suddenly started sharing their observations, while others held back, unsure if they were reading too much into it. But with each conversation, the concern became more real. People began to investigate subtly, comparing stories from old sermons, watching online clips, and asking friends who had been following Brian for years. What started as whispers began to take the shape of suspicion, and suspicion was only the first step toward exposure. By the time the rumors reached a critical mass, it was no longer just private doubts. It had become a community-wide tension. People were divided between those who still defended Brian wholeheartedly and those who quietly worried that maybe, just maybe, the leader they had admired for so long had been presenting a carefully crafted image that hid deeper truths. And as these questions began to multiply, the stage was unknowingly being set for an investigation that would ultimately uncover the shocking reality hiding behind the charismatic facade. The investigators worked carefully, knowing that any false accusation could destroy lives. They reached out to witnesses, cross-checked claims, and gathered documents to verify the miraculous events Brian had described. Some testimonies were conflicting, some were incomplete, and others raised even more questions. Each piece of information added another layer to the emerging story, revealing that certain events he had publicly presented might not have happened as described. The deeper they dug, the more they realized the extent of the inconsistencies. What had once seemed like minor exaggerations were now turning into a picture that could not be explained away as innocent mistakes. Tension built among the investigators. Every new discovery felt heavier than the last, and they knew that exposing the truth could have enormous consequences for the church and for Brian himself. Some members of the community began to get nervous when they realized an investigation was quietly underway. Speculation ran rampant, adding to the growing pressure. Despite this, the investigators remained committed to uncovering the facts, determined to bring clarity and accountability to a situation that had been shrouded in secrecy for years. And then, after weeks of careful research, a breakthrough came. Concrete evidence emerged that directly contradicted some of Brian's most famous stories. Documents, emails, and multiple eyewitness accounts formed a chain of proof that could not be ignored. The moment had arrived when whispers would turn into undeniable reality. Brian's carefully crafted public image was about to face its first true test, and the investigation was about to reveal the shocking truth that so many had quietly suspected but never dared to confront. The moment of truth finally arrived, and it hit the church community like a storm. After weeks of investigation, undeniable evidence had surfaced, proof that contradicted many of the stories Brian had shared over the years. It wasn't hidden in obscure corners. The documents, witness accounts, and recordings painted a clear picture. When the evidence was made public, the reaction was immediate and intense. Members of the congregation were shocked. Some couldn't believe it, their minds struggling to reconcile the charismatic leader they had admired with the reality now in front of them. Others felt a deep sense of betrayal, as if the foundation of trust they had built over years had been pulled from beneath their feet. Brian, confronted with the exposure, reacted in ways that only added to the tension. Some accounts suggested he tried to defend himself, offering explanations and justifications, claiming that perhaps some things were misunderstood or misremembered. Others suggested he appeared visibly shaken, struggling to maintain his composure as the truth unraveled. The scene was surreal, years of respect and admiration clashing with the harsh reality of deception. People who had once hung on to every word now questioned not just the stories, but the man himself. The exposure didn't just affect Brian, it sent ripples through the entire church community. Conversations that had once been casual whispers now erupted into heated debates. Social media exploded with discussions, as members and outsiders alike shared their shock, disbelief, and opinions. Many wondered how someone so trusted could have constructed such elaborate stories, and what motivated him to do so. Yet amidst the chaos, a few members still defended Brian, holding on to the hope that there might be truth mixed with exaggeration, refusing to abandon someone who had once been their source of inspiration. This was the turning point, the climax of a story that had been building for years. The leader who had once stood above all scrutiny was now facing a reality he could no longer control. The exposure was not just about lies, it was about trust, faith, and the consequences of deception. And as the dust began to settle, the community was left to grapple with the aftermath, realizing that the story they had followed for so long was far more complex and far more human than anyone had imagined. In the weeks following the exposure, the church community struggled to process what had happened. The shock of Brian's lies left many members feeling confused, hurt, and betrayed. Some longtime followers quietly stopped attending services, unsure if they could trust anything they had heard from the pulpit. Others tried to make sense of it, seeking answers from friends or family, or reflecting privately on their own faith. Social media was filled with discussions, debates, and heated arguments. People dissected every detail, sharing their thoughts on what had been real, what had been exaggerated, and what might have been completely fabricated. It was clear that the ripple effect of Brian's exposure was far-reaching, affecting not just the church, but the broader community of followers who had once looked up to him as a moral and spiritual guide. Yet, despite the widespread disappointment, not everyone abandoned him. Some still defended Brian, claiming that human beings are imperfect and that some mistakes should be forgiven. They argued that even if some stories were false or embellished, the positive impact he had made on their lives could not be erased. Others, however, demanded accountability. They wanted clear answers, public acknowledgement, and a genuine effort to rebuild trust. The church leadership, caught in the middle, had to navigate this delicate balance, addressing the fallout while trying to stabilize the community and maintain faith among those who remained loyal. For Brian himself, the aftermath was a period of reflection, reckoning, and intense scrutiny. His public image had been damaged, and rebuilding it would take more than words. It would require transparency, genuine remorse, and time. The exposure was a turning point not just for him, but for everyone who had been connected to him, revealing the fragile nature of trust and the importance of honesty in positions of influence. The story served as a powerful reminder that no matter how respected or charismatic someone appears, truth has a way of coming to light, and the consequences of deception are unavoidable. As the story of Brian Carn's exposure settled into the public consciousness, the community began to reflect on what had truly happened. People realized that this was more than just the fall of a single leader. It was a lesson about faith, trust, and the human tendency to believe in what we hope is true. Many who had been hurt began the slow process of healing, questioning not just Brian's stories, but the way they themselves had placed blind faith in someone else's words. It was a painful but necessary process, one that reminded everyone that critical thinking and personal discernment are as important in spiritual life as belief and devotion. At the same time, some members found hope amidst the disappointment. They understood that even though Brian's image had been shattered, their own personal experiences and growth were still real. The inspiration, motivation, and lessons they had drawn from his sermons were not completely invalidated, and in that they found a way to reconcile the mixed emotions of admiration, betrayal, and forgiveness. The story of his exposure became a conversation starter, not just about one man's actions, but about the importance of honesty, accountability, and transparency in leadership. Ultimately, the tale of Brian Carn served as a powerful reminder. No matter how charismatic, respected, or influential someone may appear, truth has a way of emerging, and deception, no matter how carefully concealed, eventually leaves a mark. The church and its followers learned that trust is fragile and that integrity matters more than popularity. And as life slowly returned to a sense of normalcy, the community carried with it a renewed awareness of the delicate balance between belief and skepticism, inspiration and reality, hope and truth, lessons that would remain long after the shock of the exposure had faded.